As always, it's a real blessing for me to be here at First Baptist Church. Such great friends here and wonderful memories, people that I care about deeply and love from the depths of my heart. I'm grateful to be here this morning. I believe it's important that we are able to use Scripture, to use these ancient words, and not an academic study of how people lived 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, but how we live today, and how it impacts the way we think, what we do, how we act. And I was reminded of this just last week and a half ago, last week. One of my neighbors, every now and then we get into some pretty deep conversations. And he said, we were talking about this situation down on the southern border. By now, most of us are aware of some of what's going on down there, with people seeking asylum being turned away because we don't have room, but we have enough room to put them in prison. We have enough resource. We don't have resource to deal with them as individuals who are seeking asylum, but we have plenty of resource to take their children from them and ship them off to places unknown. My son and his family are currently living in San Antonio, and my sister-in-law, my daughter-in-law, has been involved as an interpreter to help with refugee families to at least be able to communicate as they seek to find their children. And this is not over. It's still going on. And the reason this came up is one of my neighbors, as we were talking about this, said, well, what about what Jeff Sessions said, our Attorney General, when he reminded us that in Romans chapter 13, verse 1, we're instructed to obey our governmental leaders because they were appointed by God. Besides being taken out of historical context, it kind of disregards so much more that our Scripture has. And so I'm trying to figure out how to respond to this man. I said, well, first of all, let's just give a real brief introduction about the letter to the church of Romans. It's a letter. It's a letter to a church that Paul had never been to. It was established without him, so he did not know people there. There was a time about 45 AD, where there was a big disagreement within the church there between the Jews and the non-Jews. And it was a little disruptive, so the emperor decided to expel all Jews from Rome. They had to all get out, go. And it was maybe 15 years later that a new emperor said, okay, Jews can return. In the meantime, because Jews were experts in the Scriptures, they provided all the leadership in that church. By the time they returned, leadership had been picked up by the non-Jewish believers. And they started this conflict again that Paul was made aware of. So his letter, in part, was to say, you don't want to do this again. You don't want to do this. Although his letter doesn't say this, they did not need to be reminded that emperors were considered to be God. Emperors considered themselves to be God, and that's the way they ruled, that's the way they were treated. So whatever he was trying to communicate, it was hard for me to believe that Paul would say, give all your allegiance to this flawed human being and forget about everything you know about the God who gave us the breath of life. But that wasn't adequate. That's just, a different way of looking at things. So I thought in a better way to respond to him was that the only scripture that existed in that time was what we call the Old Testament. It was the Bible Jesus knew and read. It was the Bible that Paul knew and read. And so I thought, I'll just tell him what I know about the way we're instructed to treat aliens. And since then, I went back and did a little bit more study. And I found out that there are about 140 instances in the Old Testament where aliens are referred to and how they should be treated. Over 20 of them are about how the aliens who sojourn with you are supposed to be held on equal status, equal footing, socially and legally. We are instructed that when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor gather the gleaning of your harvest. You are to leave them for the needy and the alien. I am the Lord your God. When speaking about ownership of land, the land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. You are but aliens and sojourners with me. And so you are, so shall the alien be before the Lord. Another, he who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and shows his love for the alien by giving him food and clothing, so show your love for the alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. Show your love for the alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. And that's probably the strongest theme of relating to aliens throughout the Old Testament. Remember that you were once an alien, you were a slave in Egypt. Cursed is he who distorts the justice due to an alien. I don't think these words were spoken in jest. I don't think it was just a good idea. I do believe it's a directive. A stronger theme, even than that throughout the Old Testament, is that God constantly takes the side of those who are oppressed, who are weak, who are less than, who are without power. He's a God of equality. In Jeremiah 7:5-7, we read, "For if you truly amend your ways," he's speaking to the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem, "if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly practice justice between a man and his neighbor, if you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, nor walk after other gods to your own ruin, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever." And it makes me wonder if Bibi Netanyahu is aware of this, as he and other leaders in that part of the world demand that they take possession of that land exclusively forever and ever, while they oppress the alien. Part of the bargain is to not oppress the alien. Readers of Scripture are given an ethical injunction to care for and show empathy towards the weaker, more destitute, and more vulnerable members of society. It dictates a sensitivity to those who have been deprived and abused. The very understanding of righteousness includes a strong bias towards the weak and the poor. This is not about politics. People who want to make it a political argument, that's on them. It's not taking responsibility for the dictates and demands of the God of creation. The radical intent is to create and maintain an expansive community in which even the least fortunate are able to participate. To be sure, it requires a collective sharing, both in workload and in harvest. So there is a floor beneath which no person is permitted to sink. And so in such ways we create social bonding and a true sense of community. And that's, after all, what the gift of the land was supposed to be about. The people who occupied it were not all descendants of Abraham, which was why they were called Hebrews. The word Hebrew is derived from a negative term for a word that kind of means gang of criminals, because they were all outcasts, slaves, misfits, who went into the land of promise. Those were the Hebrews. And so, to be reminded that this is who you were, this is where you came from. You can't turn your back on others like that. It's a concern for dignity, for the least in the community, and to really work against the zealous use of human law that in the end benefits those who have and does not benefit those who have not. As we all know too well, the economic shifting due to legal constraints that make rich richer and poor poorer result in extreme fracturing in society and in the church, among believers. It fractures society throughout, which is probably the last thing the God of creation would want to see happen. So, we often see the word Lord used. We use it, we hear it used, it's printed in our Bibles. In the Old Testament sense of the use of the word Lord, it implies an acknowledgement of this required theologic understanding of the underpinning of righteous conduct in social order. And that's what God is Lord over, what his desire is. So we are now witnessing, probably more than ever in my lifetime, the powerlessness of our system, as it is being implied with indifference to the claims and distresses of the weakest among us. And so it continues, not necessarily just for the aliens, but that's what is most prominent in our news today. And for those who continue policies of oppression, though they deny that they have such policies. I've never used this expression before because I think it's, but I'll use it. May God have mercy on their souls. Amen. So what can we do? You and I, what can we do? It's painful knowing that our system is failing, is not working for most people. We can't wave a magic wand. Yes, we can call our representatives in Congress, we can write letters to them, and I know I've done such things, and I think, what's the use? You know, they're going to do where the money comes from. They're going to serve them, but there are things we can do. And this is what I think it is. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't help anybody to point these things out and say, oh, well, now we have to go home and feel bad about things. We have to know what can we do as individual people living in Central Square or in Brewerton or in Constantia. What can we do? We need, you and I, we need to uproot the evil that is taking root. Not actively, but we need to intervene before the seed germinates. And so what I believe the most effective way is for us as individuals here is to be relentless in setting a strong example of righteousness, of righteous behavior, to be gentle yet direct and educating for compassion, for respect for each person, and for the support of everyone's dignity. That's what we can do. I know it might seem like it's like, how's that going to change the world? Do you change the world one person at a time? You make the world better around you. You make your world, your sphere of influence, a better place by respecting each person, even when you don't agree with them. Respect them, hear what they have to say, see if they'll give you a chance to say what's on your mind, and if they don't, oh well. And find some common ground, something that you can agree on, and form relationships, setting a good example of righteous behavior, and respect and dignity for each. And to me, this is what being fashioned in the image and likeness of God our Creator demands. In the image and likeness of God, we treat others with dignity and respect and love. Nobody ever said, and if they did, they're wrong, that being a follower of Christ is easy. They never said that, oh, once you're baptized, you got it made. You don't have to worry about life. You do. Life might even become more difficult because we've made this pledge from our heart that we want to be followers of the person whose name we take as our own. We want to be just like Christ. We want to be little Christ. That's what Christian means. Little Christ. And so, is it easy? No. Will there be social pressures? Well, social pressures that led Jesus to be crucified. It won't lead us to that. It's against the law. But we still are, it's going to be an uphill battle for each of us to do our part. So, I pray for myself. I pray for each person to have the strength, insight, and wisdom to be true representatives